I never expected to find the letter that would tear my family apart while cleaning out my mother-in-law's attic. But there it was, tucked inside an old photo album, written in Evelyn's elegant handwriting. My name is Cassidy, and until yesterday, I thought I understood the dynamics of my husband's family. Now I'm not so sure about anything. Jake, honey, can you bring up some more boxes? I called down the stairs, quickly folding the letter and slipping it into my back pocket. My hands were trembling. Be right up. His footsteps echoed through the old house as he climbed the stairs. Mom sure kept everything, didn't she? I forced a smile as he appeared in the doorway, his dark hair dusty from our afternoon of sorting through decades of memories. We'd been at it for hours, trying to organize Evelyn's belongings before her upcoming surgery. She'd insisted we help her get things in order, though none of us wanted to think about why. Found anything interesting? Jake asked, setting down another box. I touched my pocket where the letter burned like a hot coal. Just some old photos, I said, hating how my voice wavered. He picked up a framed picture of himself and his sister Melanie as kids. Remember when Mel used to wear her hair in those crazy pigtails? He chuckled. She'd kill me if she knew I showed you these. The mention of Melanie made my stomach clench. The letter in my pocket suddenly felt heavier. Speaking of Mel, Jake continued. She called earlier. Said she's coming by tomorrow to help sort through Mom's jewelry. Wants first pick of the family heirlooms or something. Of course she did. The words from Evelyn's letter flashed through my mind. Melanie will try to take everything she can get her hands on. She always has. That's why I'm leaving the house and the business to you and Jake. Someone needs to protect our family's legacy. Cass, you okay? You look pale. I grabbed another box, needing something to do with my hands. Just tired. It's been a long day. Maybe we should call it quits for today. Get some dinner? Jake wrapped his arms around me from behind, and I leaned into him, fighting back tears. How could I tell him what his mother had written? How his sister had been manipulating their family for years? My phone buzzed, a text from Melanie. Hope you're not throwing anything valuable away. Some of us actually care about family history. I deleted the message without responding. Through the attic window, I could see Evelyn's garden below, the roses she'd tended for decades now wilting in the summer heat. She taught me how to prune them last spring, sharing stories about Jake's childhood while we worked. Had she known then what she would reveal in this letter? Jake, I started, turning in his arms. What if? The sound of a car door slamming cut me off. Through the window, I saw Melanie striding up the walkway, her designer purse swinging from her arm. Is that Mel? Jake moved to the window. I thought she wasn't coming until tomorrow. I touched the letter in my pocket again. Tomorrow would have given me time to figure out how to handle this, how to protect Jake from the truth about his sister without destroying his family in the process. Jake. Melanie's voice carried up from downstairs. You'll never believe what Mom told me about the inheritance. Jake headed for the stairs, but I grabbed his arm. Wait, I said, my heart pounding. There's something you need to know first. He looked at me with concern, and in that moment, I knew our lives were about to change forever. The only question was, would our marriage survive what I was about to tell him? Before I could show Jake the letter, Melanie burst into the attic, her heels clicking against the wooden floor like a countdown. Her perfectly styled hair and designer outfit looked out of place among the dusty boxes and cobwebs. There you are. She beamed at Jake, completely ignoring my presence. Mom's asking for you at the hospital. She wants to discuss some important family matters. Jake frowned. What family matters? We just saw her this morning. Oh, you know Mom. Melanie waved her hand dismissively. She's been so worried about everything since the diagnosis, especially about the house and the business. My fingers traced the edge of Evelyn's letter in my pocket. The timing couldn't have been worse. Actually, I stepped forward. We were just about to. Did you see what they did to Mom's rose garden? Melanie interrupted, pulling Jake toward the window. The landscapers completely butchered it. I told her not to trust your recommendation, Cassidy. The accusation stung, but I caught the real message beneath her words. This was just the beginning. Those roses are dormant, Mel. It's called winter pruning, I said, keeping my voice steady. Your mother specifically asked me to oversee it. Jake rubbed his temples, a gesture I recognized as his stress response. Can we not do this right now? If Mom needs me. She does, Melanie insisted, linking her arm through his. And while we're there, we should discuss the inheritance situation. I've been thinking about the kids' college funds, and with my current situation, I couldn't stay silent any longer. Jake, before you go anywhere, we need to talk. In private. Melanie's perfectly plucked eyebrows shot up. Private? We're family, Cassidy. There shouldn't be secrets between family. The irony of her statement made me want to laugh. Or scream. Fine, I said, pulling out Evelyn's letter. Let's talk about secrets. The color drained from Melanie's face as she recognized her mother's handwriting. Where did you get that? It was in one of these boxes, along with some very interesting bank statements. Jake looked between us, confusion clouding his features. What's going on? Nothing, Melanie said quickly. Just your wife snooping through family documents that don't concern her. They concern me when they involve my husband being manipulated out of his inheritance. The words hung in the air like dust motes caught in the afternoon sunlight. Jake took the letter from my hands, his eyes scanning the pages with growing disbelief. Mel, he whispered, is this true? Did you really take out loans in Mom's name? Melanie's composure cracked. She offered to help. I needed the money for the kids, and she said no. I cut in. The letter makes that very clear, along with her wishes for the house and business. You don't understand, Melanie's voice cracked. You with your successful little shop and your perfect marriage. Some of us have real struggles. Real struggles don't justify fraud, Mel. Jake hadn't moved, still staring at the letter. When he finally looked up, the hurt in his eyes was unbearable. How long? He asked his sister. How long have you been lying to us? Before she could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Evelyn's nurse. Mrs. Monroe asking for family. Condition deteriorating. Please come quickly. The three of us stared at each other, the weight of unspoken words and betrayals pressing down like the years of accumulated memories surrounding us. We should go, Jake said finally, his voice hollow. But this isn't over, Mel. As we headed downstairs, Melanie grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin. You have no idea what you've just started, she hissed. I met her gaze steadily. No, Melanie. I just finished what you started years ago. But watching Jake's defeated posture as he walked to the car, I wondered if uncovering the truth had cost me more than I was prepared to lose. The hospital corridor felt endless as we rushed toward Evelyn's room. Jake hadn't spoken a word since we left the house, and Melanie had mysteriously taken a different car, probably to get there first and spin her version of events. I nearly collided with my best friend Lila outside Evelyn's door. She worked part-time at the hospital cafe and often checked in on my mother-in-law during her shifts. Thank God you're here, she whispered, pulling me aside. Melanie's been in there for 20 minutes, and Evelyn's been asking for Jake. Jake pushed past us into the room. Through the doorway, I could see Melanie perched on the edge of Evelyn's bed, clutching a stack of papers. Mom, Jake's voice cracked. What's going on? Evelyn looked smaller than she had yesterday, drowning in hospital whites. Her eyes found mine, and I saw a flash of recognition and warning. Jake, sweetheart, Melanie's voice dripped honey. Mom wants to discuss the funeral arrangements. And the will. I stepped into the room. The will? Now? Evelyn needs rest, not. Actually, Evelyn's voice was weak but clear. I need to speak with Cassidy. Alone. The silence that followed was deafening. Melanie's perfectly composed face cracked for just a second, revealing something ugly underneath. Mother, you're not thinking clearly. The medication. I said alone, Melanie. Evelyn's tone left no room for argument. Jake touched my shoulder as he left, his expression unreadable. Melanie stormed out, but not before shooting me a look that could have frozen hell. Once the door closed, Evelyn reached under her pillow and pulled out another envelope. My hands shook as I took it. There's something else you need to know, she whispered. something I couldn't put in the first letter. I opened the envelope and started reading. My knees gave out, and I sank into the chair beside her bed. This can't be right, I breathed. The business? It wasn't Jake's father's?
No.
Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. And Melanie knows. She's always known. It's why she's so desperate to get her hands on everything. She thinks she's entitled to more because… The door burst open. Melanie stood there, triumph written across her face. I knew it. I knew you'd try to turn them against me. Behind her, Jake appeared, his expression devastated. You knew about Dad? All this time? Jake, wait. I started, but Melanie cut me off. Oh, let her tell you, brother dear. Let her tell you how our precious mother built her empire with another man's money while Dad worked himself to death thinking he wasn't good enough. That's not what happened. Evelyn tried to sit up, setting off a cascade of beeping monitors. A nurse rushed in. Everyone out.
Now.
In the hallway, Jake paced like a caged animal. Someone better start explaining. The business was started with money from my first love. Evelyn's voice carried from the doorway. She stood there, gripping her four-pole, ignoring the nurse's protests. Before I met your father, he died in Vietnam, leaving everything to me. Your father knew, Jake. He knew and he understood. But I didn't. Melanie's mascara ran in black streaks down her face. I had to find out from old letters in the attic. Do you know what it's like, growing up thinking you're not good enough, that there was someone else Dad could never measure up to? I watched Jake's face as the pieces fell into place. His sister's bitterness, their mother's careful planning, the weight of secrets kept for decades. The inheritance, he said slowly. You're splitting it based on what's fair. I finished, understanding finally dawning. The business goes to you, Jake, because you worked alongside your dad for years. The house goes to both of you, but the trust fund goes to my first love's grandchildren, Evelyn said softly. Melanie's kids. The monitors started beeping again, more urgently this time. As the nurses rushed Evelyn back to bed, I caught a glimpse of something in Melanie's expression, not triumph or anger, but pure, unadulterated fear. And I realized this wasn't just about money anymore. This was about a family's identity unraveling, thread by careful thread. The question was, would there be anything left to save when the truth finally finished tearing us apart? Evelyn passed away that night. The news came through a 3 a.m. phone call that changed everything. Jake answered, listened in silence, then walked out of our bedroom without a word. I found him in the garage, methodically taking apart an old motorcycle engine, his way of processing grief. The funeral's on Saturday, he said without looking up, his hands covered in grease. Mel's handling the arrangements.
Of course she was.
I crouched beside him, watching his hands shake as he stripped another bolt. We should be involved in the planning.
Why?
So, we can fight over that too. The wrench slipped, catching his knuckle. Blood mixed with oil. Here, let me. I reached for his hand, but he pulled away. Don't. His voice cracked. Just don't. My phone buzzed, a text from Lila. You need to see this. Now. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in her cafe, staring at a social media post Melanie had just shared. The funeral announcement included a special note. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to help cover outstanding medical expenses and support Evelyn's grandchildren's education fund. She's already collecting money, Lila said, sliding me a coffee. Using her mother-in-law's death to finance her lies. I scrolled through the comments. Dozens of family friends offering condolences and promising donations. Melanie's perfectly crafted responses, playing the grieving daughter while subtly hinting at financial hardship. There's more, Lila hesitated. Check the funeral home's website. The program listed Melanie as sole executor of the estate. No mention of Jake. No mention of Evelyn's actual wishes. My hands shook as I dialed our family lawyer. Straight to voicemail. I tried 3 more times before giving up. What are you going to do? Lila asked. Before I could answer, the cafe door chimed. Jake walked in, looking like he'd aged years overnight. He was holding a manila envelope. "Found this in Mom's safety deposit box," he said, dropping it on the table. The banker called. Said Mom left instructions to open it immediately after. I opened the envelope. Inside was a USB drive and another letter, this one addressed to both of us. Jake's phone rang. Melanie's name flashed on the screen. He declined the call. "She's been calling all morning," he said. "Wants me to sign some papers before the funeral. Says it's what Mom wanted." "And what do you want?" He stared at the envelope. "I want my sister back. The one I grew up with, before money and lies poisoned everything." My phone buzzed again, an email from the funeral home requesting confirmation of arrangements. The attached invoice was astronomical. "She's using Mom's funeral to drain the estate," Jake said flatly. Classic Melanie.
"We can stop this," I said.
"The letters, the evidence of fraud. And destroy what's left of our family?" He laughed bitterly. "Mom's body isn't even cold yet. Your mother wanted to protect you, to protect all of us." I pulled out the USB drive. "Maybe this will tell us how." Jake's phone rang again. This time it was the bank. His face darkened as he listened. "Someone just tried to access Mom's accounts," he said after hanging up, "using her old passwords." Melanie. Had to be. But here's the thing, they succeeded with one account. An old one I never knew existed. I connected the USB drive to my phone. A single video file appeared, dated 3 months ago. Evelyn's face filled the screen, looking directly into the camera. "If you're watching this," she began, "then I'm gone, and Melanie has already made her move. What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about our family." Jake gripped my hand as we watched, his knuckles white. By the time the video ended, we both knew attending the funeral wouldn't be enough. We had to stop Melanie from destroying not just the inheritance, but the truth about who we really were. The question was, were we ready for the cost of exposing it all? The funeral home looked more like a fortress than a place of mourning. Melanie had stationed her friends at every entrance, each one eyeing us suspiciously as we approached. I clutched my purse containing Evelyn's letters and USB drive, while Jake gripped the legal injunction we'd rushed to file that morning. "Ready?" I whispered. Jake's jaw tightened.
"No."
But Mom deserves better than this circus. We'd barely reached the door when Melanie's oldest friend, Sarah, blocked our path. "Private family service," she said, not meeting our eyes. "I am family." Jake's voice carried across the parking lot. "That's my mother in there." Heads turned. Melanie appeared in the doorway, wearing designer black and a carefully crafted expression of grief. "Jake, darling, I was so worried you wouldn't come. Though perhaps it would have been better if you hadn't brought certain people." My fingers brushed the USB drive. One push of a button and Evelyn's video would expose everything. But looking at the gathered mourners, elderly aunts dabbing their eyes, cousins whispering in corners, I hesitated. "Let's take this inside," I suggested quietly. Melanie's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. Family should stick together in times like these." The funeral home's back office was cramped, but it felt appropriate for the showdown about to unfold. Melanie perched on the edge of the desk, fingering a stack of documents. "I assume you've seen the changes to Mom's will?" She slid a paper toward Jake. She wanted to make sure the grandchildren were taken care of. "You mean the changes you forged?" I pulled out the original will from my purse. "The bank confirmed Mom's signature on your version doesn't match." "How dare you?" But her hand trembled as she reached for her water glass. "Jake, are you going to let her accuse me of—" "Stop." Jake's voice was deadly quiet. "Just stop, Mel. We know about the secret account. About Dad's real relationship with the business. About everything." The color drained from Melanie's face. "You don't understand. My kids. I had to protect them." "By stealing? By lying?" I stepped forward. "By using your mother's death to—" A commotion outside interrupted us. Through the office window, I saw Lila arguing with the funeral director, waving what looked like financial documents. "Security," Melanie called out, but I was faster. I grabbed the USB drive and plugged it into the office computer. "Wait." Melanie's composure cracked. "Please. You don't know what this will do to the family." Evelyn's face appeared on screen. My dearest children, her voice filled the room. If you're watching this, then the worst has happened. Not just my death, but the destruction of the trust one spent a lifetime building. The office door burst open. The funeral director entered, followed by 2 police officers. Mrs. Monroe? One officer stepped forward. We have some questions about certain financial transactions. Melanie's mask finally shattered. He was going to take everything, she screamed, pointing at Jake. Just like Dad took Mom's love from my real father. I deserved more. My children deserved more. The room fell silent except for Evelyn's voice still playing from the computer. But remember, my darlings, that true inheritance isn't about money. It's about the choices we make. I moved to stop the video, but Jake caught my wrist. Let it play, he whispered. Let everyone hear the truth. Watching Melanie collapse into tears as the officers led her away, I felt no triumph. Only a bone-deep sadness for what greed and secrets had done to this family. Outside, mourners gathered in confused clusters. The funeral would have to be delayed now. More secrets would come to light. More pain would surface before healing could begin. What do we do now? I asked Jake as we stood in the autumn sunshine, surrounded by the wreckage of family ties. He took my hand, his father's ring glinting on his finger. We honor Mom's real wishes. All of them, even the hard ones. Even forgiving Melanie? Especially that. He squeezed my hand. But first, we bury our mother properly, without the lies. The weight of Evelyn's final letter pressed against my heart. There was still one secret left to reveal, one that would either heal this family or destroy it forever. The county jail's visiting room smelled of industrial cleaner and despair. Melanie sat across from us in her orange jumpsuit, her perfectly manicured nails now chipped and broken. 3 days in custody had stripped away her polished facade, revealing something raw and desperate underneath. My kids need me, she whispered, picking at a loose thread on her sleeve. The school called yesterday. Tommy's acting out again. Jake shifted in his metal chair, but said nothing. We'd spent the last 2 nights arguing about this visit, about what to do next. The evidence against Melanie was damning: forged documents, embezzled funds, identity theft. She was facing serious time. I can fix this, Melanie continued. If you just drop the charges, we can work something out. For the family's sake. Family? The word tasted bitter in my mouth. You stole from your own mother while she was dying. I was protecting what was rightfully mine. Her voice echoed off the concrete walls. You have no idea what it was like watching Mom favor Jake all those years, knowing the truth about my real father. A guard glanced our way. Jake reached for my hand under the table, but I pulled away. The final letter from Evelyn burned in my pocket, the one I still hadn't shown either of them. The prosecutor offered a deal. I said, return the money, serve 6 months, get probation, and lose my children? Melanie's laugh was hollow. Child Services is already investigating. 1 conviction and they'll take my kids away. Jake finally spoke. We could take them, temporarily, until you. No. Melanie slammed her hands on the table. You don't get to play savior with my children. You've already taken everything else. The guard stepped closer. Everything okay here? I nodded, but my hands were shaking. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Justice shouldn't feel this much like revenge. Time's up, the guard announced. As we stood, Melanie grabbed my arm. You think you've won? That you're better than me? Her nails dug into my skin. Wait until you read Mom's last letter. The one about what really happened the night Dad died. I froze. What are you talking about? Ask your precious husband why he was the last person to see our father alive. Ask him about the argument they had over the business. About the brake lines on Dad's truck. That's enough. Jake's voice cracked like a whip. The guard pulled Melanie away, but her words had already done their damage. I watched Jake's face, saw the color drain from it, and knew there was truth in what she'd said. Outside, the autumn air felt too thin to breathe. Jake reached for me, but I stepped back. Cass, I can explain. Can you? Because right now I'm wondering if I ever knew you at all. My fingers touched Evelyn's final letter. Did you know what was in this? What? I pulled out the envelope, hands trembling. Your mother wrote it the day before she died. Said it would explain everything about that night. Jake's expression changed. Don't open it. Please. Why not? What are you afraid of? Because some truths destroy everything they touch. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture so familiar it hurt. Yes, I was there that night. Yes, we argued. But I didn't. I wouldn't. My phone buzzed, a text from Lila. Police at your shop. Something about financial irregularities. Call me. The world tilted sideways. In our rush to expose Melanie, we'd forgotten about the business loans Jake's father had taken out, loans that were never properly transferred after his death. Loans that, technically, could be considered fraudulent. Jake. My voice sounded distant. What did you do? But looking at his face, I already knew. We'd been so focused on Melanie's crimes, we'd never stopped to question where the original money came from, or why Evelyn had been so desperate to protect her secrets. The letter felt heavy as lead now. One truth exposed had started this avalanche. What would this final revelation do to what was left of our family? Jake reached for the envelope. Some secrets should stay buried, Cass. Like your father's death? His hand dropped. In the distance, police sirens wailed. I found Margaret Chen waiting on my front porch at dawn. Evelyn's oldest friend and confidant sat in the morning mist like a ghost from the past, clutching a weathered leather briefcase. You open the letter, she said. Not a question.
No.
My voice was hoarse from a sleepless night. Jake hadn't come home, but Melanie knows what's in it. Margaret nodded slowly. As do I. Evelyn told me everything before she died. She patted the briefcase, and she left proof. Before I could respond, a car pulled into the driveway. Jake stepped out, looking haunted. Behind him, another car parked, Melanie, accompanied by a police officer. What's she doing out? I demanded. Posted bail, Melanie said, approaching the porch. She'd traded her jumpsuit for a simple black dress. Had help from an unexpected source. Margaret stood. From me. Because it's time everyone knew the truth. All of it. The morning air crackled with tension as Margaret opened her briefcase. Evelyn kept everything. The original loan documents. The insurance investigation. The mechanic's report about the brake lines. Jake's hands clenched into fists. You don't understand what happened that night. I understand perfectly, Margaret cut in. Because I was there too, at the garage, when your father confronted you about the embezzlement. My head spun. What embezzlement? Not Jake's, Melanie whispered.
Dad's.
He'd been stealing from Mom's inheritance for years. The money from her first love, my real father. Margaret pulled out a stack of papers. Robert Monroe was a desperate man. When Jake discovered the theft, he threatened to expose everything. They argued. Robert left angry, driving too fast on wet roads. The brake lines were already failing. Jake's voice cracked. Dad knew. He'd been putting off repairs. I tried to stop him from driving that night, but he wouldn't listen. Said he'd rather die than face the shame. And Mom protected you, Melanie said. Made it look like an accident. Covered up the financial mess. Just like she always protected you. She protected all of us. Jake shot back. Including you, Mel. Where do you think your trust fund came from? The money you've been stealing? Enough. Margaret's voice cut through the tension. Evelyn wanted this to end. That's why she wrote the final letter. To confess her part in everything. The police officer stepped forward. Ma'am, if you have evidence of criminal activity. I have evidence of a family destroying itself over secrets and lies, Margaret interrupted.
She turned to me.
Cassidy, Evelyn chose you as executor for a reason. Not just because you married Jake, but because you're the only one who might understand why she did what she did. My fingers traced the envelope seal. To protect her children. No, Margaret said softly. To force them to face the truth. Together. I opened the letter. As I read Evelyn's final words aloud, tears fell freely. She confessed everything: the cover-up, the redistributed money, the decades of carefully maintained lies. But more importantly, she wrote of love, of sacrifice, of the cost of protecting people from their own mistakes. The inheritance, I finished reading, isn't the money or the business. It's the truth, and the chance to choose a different path. Silence fell. The morning sun broke through the mist, casting long shadows across the porch. The charges, the officer said quietly, against both parties. If restitution is made, we'll make it right, Jake said, looking at his sister. All of it. Melanie wiped her eyes. I don't know how. Together, I said, surprising myself. The way Evelyn wanted. Margaret smiled, closing her briefcase. She said you'd understand, Cassidy. That's why she trusted you with her final secret. What secret? She nodded toward my midsection. Check the last page of the letter. My hand flew to my stomach as I read the final lines. Somehow, Evelyn had known before I did. A new life, growing beneath my heart. A fresh start, untainted by old sins. Well, Melanie said, attempting a watery smile, I guess my kids are getting a cousin. It wasn't forgiveness.
Not yet.
But as the morning light strengthened, casting away the last shadows of night, it felt like the possibility of dawn. 6 months later, I stood in Evelyn's garden, watching Jake and Melanie's kids plant spring bulbs together. The roses were beginning to bud, tiny promises of new life breaking through winter-hardened stems. They're getting along better, Lila said, handing me a cup of herbal tea. My growing belly made bending over the flower beds impossible now, but I could still supervise. Most days, I agreed. The family counseling helps. Melanie emerged from the house, carrying a tray of lemonade for the kids. Her ankle monitor caught the sunlight, part of her probation agreement. The court had been lenient, considering the circumstances and her cooperation in untangling the financial mess. Tommy, careful with those tulip bulbs, she called out. Your grandmother loved those. Jake looked up from where he was teaching Tommy proper planting depth. Their relationship was healing slowly, one shared moment at a time. The truth about their father's death had nearly broken them both, but somehow, facing it together had started the mending. Found another one, Melanie's daughter Sarah announced, holding up a small envelope buried in the soil. Evelyn's final surprise, letters and small treasures hidden throughout her beloved garden, meant to be discovered over years. What's this one say? I asked as Sarah brought it over. For my grandchildren, she read, who will grow stronger than the roots of these roses. Melanie's hands trembled as she took the envelope. Inside was a key and an old photograph, her biological father in his military uniform, standing proud beside a young Evelyn. The keys to his storage unit, Jake said quietly. Mom told Margaret there were things there you should have. Things that might help you understand. Melanie nodded, unable to speak. She'd started therapy last month, finally ready to confront the anger she'd carried since childhood. The business was changing too. Jake had transformed their father's old trucking company into a logistics firm, with Melanie handling the books, under supervision, of course. Her accounting skills, once used for deception, were being channeled into rebuilding what their father had nearly destroyed. Aunt Cass, Tommy called out, when the baby comes, can we teach them about the roses too? Of course, I said, touching my belly where Evelyn's last prediction kicked and tumbled. That's what family does. Later that evening, as Jake and I sat on the porch swing, I pulled out the final letter I'd been saving. The one Evelyn had marked for the future. Ready? Jake asked. I broke the seal and began to read. My dearest ones, if you're reading this, then the garden is blooming again. Remember that growth requires both sunshine and rain, joy and pain. The greatest inheritance I could leave you isn't in bank accounts or business ledgers. It's in the strength you've found in facing the truth together. The letter continued, but something caught my eye. A postscript, written in shakier handwriting. P.S. Check behind the loose brick in the garden wall. Some secrets are worth keeping just long enough for people to be ready for them. Jake and I exchanged glances. Another mystery, Another truth waiting to be uncovered. But this time, we weren't afraid. Tomorrow, I said, folding the letter. Some truths can wait for morning. As if in agreement, the baby kicked. Above us, stars emerged in the darkening sky, and somewhere in the garden, a late rose bloomed, its petals opening to embrace both darkness and light. Melanie appeared in the doorway. Kids are asking for their bedtime story. They want to hear about Grandma Evelyn again. Coming, Jake said, helping me up. Which story should we tell? I looked at the family gathered in the warm light of the house, broken, healing, but together. Let's tell them about the garden, about how things that seem dead can come back to life, if you're patient enough to wait for spring. Melanie smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and about how some inheritances aren't things at all. No, I agreed, following them inside. They're the choices we make, and the truths we're brave enough to face. Behind us, the garden settled into evening, keeping its remaining secrets safe until we were ready to discover them, one truth at a time.